Cars from the 60s that are still on the road today have been subject to a lot of abuse, and they can get beat up and rust, and they have also been smashed and repaired. So we found on the Lose Change 1969 Camaro that both of the quarter panels were in desperate need of replacement. When the car was painted before we brought it in, it looked okay. The fit was a little weird in a few spots, but when we started to strip away the paint, we found everything I mentioned, that it had been damaged before. It looks like it got hit in the back. The tail panel was kind of wrinkled up, had a bunch of holes in it from being pulled with a slide hammer. And then, of course, the rust repairs that were in the wheelhouses and in the quarter panel certainly weren't up to the standards that we wanted to have on a car of this caliber. So when you do a quarter panel replacement, it's a big job, but we're going to try and give a few tips to make that task go a little bit smoother. Once our car came back from the media blaster, we bolted it up to a rotisserie and sprayed some epoxy primer on it and made everything turn black. And then we mounted it on our chassis fixture, which has mount points that mimic where all the factory mount points are supposed to be on a 1969 Camaro. And the reason why we do this is so that we can remove panels and put them back on and be sure that all of the pickup points are in the right spot. But if you're going to do a quarter panel replacement in your home garage, you want to make sure that all the weight is still on the suspension as if it was going down the road. This is because these cars can flex, and if you put the body up on jack stands and not where the suspension points are, you might find that, especially in convertibles, the structure relaxes a little bit and can change, and you might get the door to fit and the rear deck lid to fit real nice, but then once you put the thing back on its wheels and everything shifts back to where it's supposed to be, those gaps might tighten up. So it's really important to make sure it's supported properly. Another thing to check before you cut the panel off is the width of the gap between the quarter panel and the inner structure by the rear side windows. When you pull the quarter panel off, you're risking putting the new one back on and enlarging that gap or making it narrower. And that size is very specific because that's a perfect size for the window and the weather strip and the seal. And if you mess with that and don't get that exactly on the new panel as it was in the old one, you're risking your window not fitting, not rolling up and down smoothly, or worse, even leaking. Another trick that we've learned is to make sure when you're ready to do the quarter panel that you bolt on all of the adjacent panels. Make sure the door's in place and it fits well. Even if you're not going to use that door again, you want to make sure you've got some kind of reference point so when you take the quarter panel off, you know where the new quarter is going to fit. So leave the door on, leave the deck lid on, and we also recommend only changing one panel at a time. We've seen it many times where people say, well, everything on the back of the car is rusty, so they cut off the quarters, the wheelhouses, the trunk drops, the tail pan, and then you've got this wide open space that, you know, nothing will align to. You can certainly put one together that has been disassembled that far, but you save yourself a ton of time by leaving those reference points in place. In our case, we also left the trunk lid weather strip channel in place so that, you know, as we were putting this thing together, that never moved. In fact, we welded that right to the trunk floor with some supports to make sure that when we put the new quarter panels on, that we knew that the trunk lid was going to close and seal properly. Now you'll notice that we cut major sections out of the middle of our quarter panels, but we left all of the perimeters still intact. And this is our reference points. But by cutting the middles out, it allowed us to replace the trunk floor a little bit easier and the trunk floor extensions that go down to the quarter panels and do some tail panel work without having to fight working around the old quarter panel. But when it came time to actually removing the quarter structure itself, we did one side at a time, drilled all the spot welds out, and removed it in the opposite fashion that it was installed from at the factory. We ordered a set of full quarter panels from Classic Industries, and these go all the way to the roof, all the way back to the tail panel, and they wrap into the door jamb area to make sure we could do a complete repair, so when it was finished, you'd never be able to tell these things were ever done. Little by little, we had new pieces of steel to weld to. We added the Detroit Speed deep tub kit and some new outer wheelhouses. The trunk floor was new. The tail pan had been replaced. The roof section was going to stay, so that's original GM steel. But once we drilled out all those welds and broke all those attachment points, we pried off the remaining pieces of the original quarter panel. It's important to remember that even full quarter panels are only the outside of the structure, and where the door jamb area is, there's some inner structure that might also have been damaged or rusty or not welded fully. We've seen them where from the GM factory these things weren't attached properly, or they might be bent or distorted. So the key to a successful quarter panel install is a lot of trial fitting to make sure that every side lines up where it's supposed to go. You might have to hammer and dolly that ridge, especially if you drilled out the spot welds and distorted the panel while you were removing the old one. You might have to fix some of that kind of stuff. So we went around and made sure that the panel installed onto the car in a temporary fashion using sheet metal screws and clamps so that we could make sure that every area fit properly. And sometimes you have to hammer and dolly an edge, or you might have to stretch or push things around a little bit to get it to fit the way you want it to. And once you go through all of those exercises, only then do you punch some holes in your new quarter panel and start to weld that back together. Throughout this test fit process, make sure you put the door striker in and close and latch the door, and make sure that everything lines up properly. Again, close the deck lid, make sure that looks good. But when we were done and we were happy with the way everything fit, we started to replace all those screws with plug welds. We used a plug weld technique in the door jamb area, which means one of the pieces of metal has a hole in it, and then you plug that up with weld and weld through to the other panel. And it just takes a little bit of time to do a proper plug weld and then grind them all smooth. You got to make sure you reattach that weather strip channel in the trunk lid area, and it attaches to the tail pan. Of course, the bottom of the quarter attaches to the trunk floor, drop down extension, and then one of the last seams to weld up is the one at the roof. And again, you plug weld all of those little tabs back together, and that seam will get ground, and eventually we use a modern non-lead body solder to solidify that seam the same way it was when the car was built originally. But at that point, you can move to the other side and do it all over again. Classic Industries makes replacement panels to do an entire Camaro. So if you have rust or crash damage, nothing is beyond saving if you take your time and make sure you do it right.